Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
President Trump has again attacked his own Attorney General, accusing Jeff Sessions of failing to properly investigate his presidential rival Hillary Clinton. Media reports and rumours are swirling in Washington that the president is considering sacking Mr Sessions. Our North America editor John Sobel is at the White House. John, after the head of the FBI, this would be another high-profile sacking of a man until very recently the president regarded as a close and essential ally.
And that is the key difference between the sacking of the FBI Director James Comey and Jeff Sessions. James Comey, Donald Trump inherited from the Obama presidency. Jeff Sessions was the first senator to come out and back Donald Trump in his bid to become president. They were the best of friends, and Jeff Sessions has given Donald Trump 100% loyalty, which has been repaid in the last week by a New York Times interview in which Donald Trump criticised him and said he would have never appointed him if he had known he was going to excuse himself from the Russia investigation, and tweets on consecutive days describing him as weak and beleaguered. But in the last hour or so, we've heard from the new White House communications director that a decision will be taken soon on Jeff Sessions' future. You can only conclude from that his future does not look very bright. If he goes, then what happens to the special counsel Robert Mueller that has been charged to investigate the Russia investigation? A huge cloud hangs over that as well. And so Democrats are busy accusing the president of bullying the Attorney General out of the White House, out of the Justice Department, so that the president can close down the Russia investigation. If that happens, that would be epic and a bit of a political earthquake here in Washington.
We shall watch with interest. John, thanks very much.
You're probably right. That's the answer Donald Trump's new communication chief gave when asked whether the president wants his Attorney General Jeff Sessions to resign. Such is the precariousness of Mr Sessions' position tonight, with his boss tweeting about how weak he is. The White House dysfunction is distracting lawmakers from another crucial issue. The Senate is determining the future of America's healthcare system. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Rugman joins us live from Washington now. Jonathan.
Yes, well, within the hour here, the Senate is supposed to be voting on whether to resume debate on healthcare reform. That vote's so important that Senator John McCain, who's just been diagnosed with brain cancer, has flown back from Arizona to take part in that vote. President Trump absolutely desperate for a signature piece of legislation to be passed to show for his 6 months in office. But as you say, Washington is very much distracted by the ongoing taunting and tormentation of Jeff Sessions, Donald Trump's Attorney General. Friends of Jeff Sessions say he doesn't want to resign. Friends of President Trump say he is thinking of saying, "You're fired," to him. And as one Republican congressman put it today, the level of dysfunctionality in the White House is such that the fun has been taken out of dysfunction. Washington doesn't just awake to birdsong these days, but to tweets of a different kind. At 12 minutes past 6 this morning, the president homed in on his own Attorney General in what some are calling bullying online. Jeff Sessions has taken a very weak position on Hillary Clinton crimes, he wrote on Twitter.
Mrs. Clinton.
Never mind that the FBI cleared the president's former rival of any wrongdoing. While most of America has moved on, Mrs. Clinton still haunts Donald Trump, the Banquo to his Macbeth. And with the president's own son-in-law back on Capitol Hill today, facing allegations he conspired with the Russians, Mr. Trump is once again obsessed that so-called crooked Hillary should face justice as well.
We need to make America great again.
Today's tweet of the day victim is the same as yesterday's. His full name, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, the first senator to endorse Trump's run for president. Now not so well regarded, in fact he's loathed.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give...
At his confirmation hearing, he said under oath he'd had no meetings with Russians.
I have not met with any Russians at any time to discuss any political campaign.
Then it turned out he'd spoken to the Russian ambassador twice. But that's not what makes his boss angry.
Therefore, I have recused myself in the matters.
What does is that his Attorney General recused himself from the FBI's investigation when the president probably wanted him to stop it. In yesterday's early morning tweet, Mr. Trump called Sessions beleaguered. This morning, the president's communications director suggested he wants to give his Attorney General the bird.
The president wants him gone.
I do know the president pretty well, and if there's this level of tension in the relationship that's public, you're probably right.
And Washington is operating on hyperspeed, struggling to keep up with what America's commander-in-chief will say or do next.
Well, I'm very concerned about the continuing drama, chaos, instability, and dysfunction coming out of the White House. You know, I've come to expect a certain amount of dysfunction in government, but they have taken the fun out of dysfunction. This is really tough.
Trump's real target may not be Sessions, but this man, Robert Mueller, the independent counsel investigating links with Russia. Fire Sessions, and maybe the next Attorney General will fire Mueller too.
The president gets to decide who is hired and fired in the executive branch. That's his prerogative. If he has concerns or questions or problems with the Attorney General, I'm sure he'll bring him up with him himself.
You're fired.
Last night at the annual Scout Jamboree, the president turned a traditionally non-political event in short trousers into an all-too-grown-up broadside against Washington.
And it's not a good place. In fact, today I said we ought to change it from the word swamp to the word cesspool or perhaps to the word sewer. But it's not good.
Mr. Trump named 5 members of his cabinet as former Scouts, but he didn't include the name of Eagle Scout, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III.
As the Scout law says, a Scout is trustworthy, loyal. We could use some more loyalty, I will tell you that.
And the Attorney General, having fallen foul of his boss on loyalty, can now expect none in return. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, Washington.
Well, joining me now from Washington is Brie Payton, a political reporter for the conservative website The Federalist, and Varsha Sharma, a senior correspondent for the liberal digital news platform Now This. Brie Payton, I mean, critics are calling it bullying. It's certainly public humiliation. The president's treatment of his Attorney General, I mean, is that acceptable? Is it presidential?
Sure. Well, at the end of the day, Attorney General Jeff Sessions does serve at the pleasure of the president. And I think it's very understandable for the president to be now frustrated with the Attorney General who he hired to investigate this Russia investigation and other matters and uphold the law, you know, for him to turn around and recuse himself over what turns out to be a handshake during a conference with the Russian ambassador last summer. I mean, I could understand if I was the president being confused and or frustrated at Jeff Sessions' decision to recuse himself.
Yeah, but the president is a man who made his name saying you're fired on a TV show, but seems incredibly reluctant to use that phrase in real life. I mean, wouldn't it be more dignified to just sack Jeff Sessions, if that's what he wants to do?
Sure. Well, this is a repeated pattern that Donald Trump likes to do. He likes to hold over this power over individuals to get them to succumb to his will. We saw this with Ted Cruz. He kind of does this weird loyalty thing where he'll hold out promises and rewards, or he'll hold out punishments over people in order to get them to do what he wants or to get other people to do what he wants. So I think, you know, while it may not look presidential or may not look dignified, I think that this is a repeated thing that he does and a tactic that he employs in order to get what he wants.
Varsha Sharma, the president clearly thinks there are questions over Ukraine's interference in the election campaign, and he clearly thinks the Attorney General isn't doing enough to investigate it. That's his right, isn't it, as president?
That is his right, but I think, you know, the one actually ethical thing that we've seen Jeff Sessions do so far in this administration is to recuse himself from the Russia investigation, because he was caught either purposely or accidentally omitting information under oath in front of Senate giving testimony. So that could have been its own right. Sessions actually did the right thing by stepping away, and now his boss actually wants to fire him or force him to resign for doing the right thing.
So you'd like to see Jeff Sessions stay, would you?
I wouldn't necessarily like to see stay, but I don't think that Trump firing him or forcing him to resign by putting him through this sort of emotional torture is the right way to go about it, because we all know that Trump's end game is to try and either halt or interfere with Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. So I don't think any of these tools should be used by the president, whether he's able to use them or not, in order to just interfere with what is a legitimate investigation.
I mean, Brie Payton, Russia still haunts the president, though, doesn't it? I mean, it's not going away, and that's a real problem for him.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not going away because, you know, members of the media are completely fixated on it, and it will still remain a problem as long as the media does decide to fixate and pay attention on it. So, you know, I think he is going to have to deal with this going forward. I think a lot of the information that we have seen come out and a lot of the so-called smoking guns have been kind of nothing but nothing burgers. So, you know, I think as long as he just continues to do his job, and I think it actually behooves him to talk about this less, right? I think if he turns to his administration's priorities and he turns to, you know, making law and working with Congress in order to get things done, I think that that actually behooves him because most Americans, according to a study by Bloomberg that was released actually last week, shows that only 6% of Americans think that the Russia investigation is the top priority facing this country. But most people think it's healthcare. Most people think it's immigration. Most people want more information and are more interested in the president's agenda in other areas.
Are you saying that there are no questions for the Trump administration to answer on Russia? You know, Jared Kushner's on Capitol Hill again today. Clearly, even Republicans think Donald Trump Jr. has questions to answer.
Yeah, that's not at all what I said. I think that, you know, the American people do deserve to know to what extent Russia was involved with our election. However, I think overreacting to the information that is coming out does make the Kremlin seem more powerful than they really are. And I think instilling doubt and instilling fear in the American people, in our institutions and in our democratic process is exactly what Moscow wants. So what I'm saying is that I think we need to be very careful and precise in nuance in how we cover and talk about all of this.
I mean, the problem for opponents, though, is that there's no real knockout blow, is there, against the president? And he still remains popular among the core.
Yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily that there's no knockout blow. I think it's the fact that we have an electorate and, more importantly, a Republican Congress who are constantly moving the goalpost and moving their line for what they find acceptable because of who President Trump is. So we've had several smoking guns. The president himself said he fired former FBI Director James Comey because he didn't want him to investigate him over Russia. We have several instances of President Trump possibly obstructing justice with this investigation. Whether or not Senate or congressional Republicans actually care about that is another issue, but that doesn't mean what he's doing is not unlawful or not unethical.
Brie Payton, I mean, the president is looking for a success with this healthcare bill. I mean, what would you say are his successes to date?
Sure. Well, okay, something that has been very interesting about the Trump administration is that he doesn't really have to actually pass laws in order for things to happen. When he, all throughout the campaign, he promised to make the border more secure and he promised to build a wall, right? That was a really big campaign promise. And yet to date, there has not been a single brick laid across the border. However, there has been a dramatic, I believe it's 53% drop in illegal border crossings since the president has been sworn into office. And I think that that's kind of a phenomenon and a unique anomaly from this administration in that, you know, he doesn't necessarily have to lay down concrete bricks. He doesn't necessarily have to pass specific legislations or specific laws. I mean, we've seen dramatic booms in the stock market and among business, confidence among businesses here in the United States. And that's happened without any hard legislation or physical bricks being laid down across the border.
Brie Payton and Versha Sharma, we're going to have to end it there. Sorry I couldn't come back to you, Versha, but thanks both of you for joining us. Thank you.
Washington itself, where the White House is continuing its relentless Twitter pounding of the Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Last week, the president said he wished he'd never have appointed Mr. Sessions. If he'd known, he'd recuse himself from the Russia investigation. This morning at 6 a.m., the social media assault continued. All this as he tried to pass a bill on healthcare reform. He did so in the end by a whisker. Mark Urban has been watching the events of the day.
President of the United States.
Despite a packed legislative agenda and multiple international challenges, the standoff between President and those investigating him continues. Today, he fueled doubts about the future of his own principal law officer.
I am disappointed in the Attorney General. He should not have recused himself almost immediately after he took office. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me prior to taking office, and I would have quite simply picked somebody else. So I think that's a bad thing, not for the president, but for the presidency. I think it's unfair to the presidency, and that's the way I feel.
The president unleashed one of his early morning tweet storms, covering a variety of subjects, but attacking his own Attorney General, saying he's taken a very weak position on Hillary Clinton crimes. Where are emails and DNC server and intel leakers? It followed another tweet yesterday where he'd asked rhetorically, why aren't the committees and investigators and, of course, our beleaguered Attorney General looking into crooked Hillary's crimes and Russia relations?
This is just outright bullying of Jeff Sessions at this point. We've seen it now for several days running, and the president almost appearing to want to force him to quit, force him to resign, rather than be forced into another awkward position of actually demanding his resignation or sending him his walking papers.
That touched a nerve with many Republicans on the Hill, where Jeff Sessions served for 20 years as a senator, alongside men like Lindsey Graham, a persistent Republican Trump critic, who responded to the president's latest tweets with his own, saying,
President Trump's tweet today suggesting Attorney General Sessions pursue prosecution of a former political rival is highly inappropriate.
So is the Republican caucus fraying? Well, the House Majority Leader was today still backing his president.
It's up to the president to decide what his personnel decisions is and any possible fallout that comes from that. If he has concerns about anyone in the administration and their conduct of their jobs, I'm sure he's going to talk to them directly.
Speaker Ryan, like many on the Hill, wants to try and maintain momentum on the platform he was elected on, with the repeal and replacement of President Obama's health care plan ranking high on that agenda. Today, a Senate vote so narrow that John McCain had to come in from his sickbed carried that forward, delivering a fillip for the president.
I hope we can again rely on humility, on our need to cooperate, on our dependence on each other, to learn how to trust each other again, and by so doing better, serve the people who elected us. Stop listening to the bombastic loudmouths on the radio and television and the internet. To hell with them. They don't want anything done for the public good. Our incapacity is their livelihood. Let's trust each other. Let's return to regular order.
The motion to proceed on health care has just passed.
But the legislative game of pass the parcel continues between two Republican-controlled chambers, hooked on the rhetoric of repealing Obamacare, but scared of the consequences of depriving millions of their care.
This is not the end of the road. It may be a near-term win for Trump today, but there are significant differences. This is 1/6 of the U.S. economy. It's tens of millions of people who are poised to lose their health care under any form of the bill we're going to see today. And that is proving deeply, deeply unpopular. This bill only had the support of around 20% of the American people. Whether or not the Republicans have got the political calculus right today, I think a lot of people are questioning.
That battle will pause soon for summer's congressional recess. But the Russia probe will go on. And today, the new White House communications director said the president will soon come to a decision about the future of his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions.
Mark Urban. Well, earlier I spoke to one of the few political experts who predicted Donald Trump's victory in last year's election. Professor Allan Lichtman got the last 9 presidential winners right. He also stood formerly for the Democrats in the Virginia Senate. Well, 9 months after that Trump win, he's predicting the end of Trump's presidency and has written a book arguing his position, The Case for Impeachment. I began by asking him how he reached both his predictions.
My prediction of a Donald Trump victory was based upon a scientific method studying all American elections going back to 1860. My prediction of a Donald Trump impeachment, of course, could not be based on a mathematical model, because there haven't been enough examples of impeachment in U.S. history. But my prediction of a Donald Trump impeachment in my book, The Case for Impeachment, was based on a deep study of the history of impeachments, the basis for impeachments, Donald Trump's record as a businessman, and Donald Trump's record during the first 2 or 3 months of his administration. That was enough to point me towards what seemed to be an inevitable end to the presidency in the first term.
And are you suggesting that impeachment is imminent?
Well, impeachment takes time. Let's not forget that Bill Clinton wasn't impeached until well into the 5th year of his presidency. Richard Nixon didn't resign until more than 5.5 years of his presidency. So I wouldn't say impeachment is right around the corner, but I do think it's going to come. And when it will come will be when Republicans come to realize that this president is a liability to their political survival. The Lichtman rule of politics is that the first requisite for any incumbent office holder is personal survival, not loyalty to someone else.
Impeachment, though, is not a thing. It is a vote. It takes people to back it.
That's right. Impeachment is a vote by a majority, not a supermajority, of the U.S. House of Representatives, and of course, Republicans control the U.S. House. But it would only take about 24 Republicans to defect from Donald Trump to get a majority vote on impeachment. That's only about 10% of Republicans in the House.
So is there a loyalty still from the Republican Party towards Donald Trump? Where do they stand on this?
I think his party stands on a knife edge. On the one hand, they desperately want to support their president, and they don't want to see an ugly impeachment process. On the other hand, they realize that a president whose approval rating is in the 36 to 40% range is a liability to their party and could be a liability to their own personal reelection. I don't think Republicans are at impeachment yet, but it wouldn't take all that much to push them over the line.
If Jeff Sessions is removed or goes, do you think that will trigger a revolt in the party base?
No, I don't think the firing of Jeff Sessions or the pushing of Jeff Sessions out by itself would be enough for the party, the Republicans, to move towards impeachment. What might move them towards impeachment would be that if the firing or resignation of Jeff Sessions was a prelude to the firing of the special counsel Robert Mueller. That could push Republicans over the line, although I'm not even certain that would do it.
So we're getting back to essentially the Russia scandal or the Russia question here. Is your sense that impeachment would come from treason?
I think we are treading close to possible treason. Russia attacked the United States. It wasn't a military attack, but it was an attack nonetheless, not only through hacking of Democratic emails, but through the use of Russian state-controlled media and through the use of trolls and bots to poison our political discourse. And if any of Trump's team was involved in colluding with the Russians in that attack, that arguably is treason. If Trump himself knew about it, even if he didn't participate, that's another crime called misprision of treason, the failure to report treason. And if Trump himself was involved, I believe a strong case could be made for treason. And treason is a very serious charge. No sitting high public official of the United States has ever been charged with treason in our history.
You write in the book about Trump's vulnerabilities. What do you see as his vulnerabilities?
I wrote in The Case for Impeachment that a Russian sword of Damocles is hanging over this administration. It's hanging on a very thin thread now. That meeting with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort, with a multiplicity of Russian actors, is, in my mind, pretty powerful circumstantial proof of collusion. The purpose of the meeting was to get from the Russian government dirt on Hillary Clinton, their opponent. That alone, the willingness to take that meeting, the eagerness to take that meeting, is certainly strong circumstantial evidence of collusion.
But people listening to this will be, possibly saying there is a man who's clearly a Democrat who is creating, if you like, rumor for political spite.
nonsense. I have been predicting elections since 1984, and I've predicted about as many Republican victories as Democratic victories. If I was just, a flack for the Democratic Party, I never would have done that. In fact, I've lost all my Democratic friends because I predicted Donald Trump's victory. I even got a note from him acknowledging that prediction, saying, "A good call, Professor." In addition, there have been plenty of presidents with whom I've disagreed with their policies, but I've never before predicted a president was going to get impeached.
Allan Lichtman there, and we're joined now by the Republican strategist Chris Nywing. And just before we came on air, Chris, we should tell the viewers that the US House of Representatives had definitely overwhelmingly backed new sanctions against Russia. The number's 419 to 3. The question now is, will Donald Trump have to go along with that overwhelming vote for stronger sanctions, or will he resist it?
Well, it's always difficult to predict what President Trump does. He's very, his behavior and his actions are always, they come directly from him, and sometimes he disagrees with his Republican Party, and even getting elected. I mean, he came to power in a very diverse way. It will, restrict some of his capabilities, especially when dealing with Russia. It's hard to say. I think he'll think it over, but I think we could see resistance based on his past actions.
When you look at what's happened today, the healthcare, not even a bill about a bill which essentially was about repealing Obamacare, passed by a whisker. He got 50-50 on that, and that was having wheeled out poor John McCain, the senator who's just undergone brain surgery for his cancer. Now, this is not a man who looks in legislative control at the moment, is it?
I think that'd be correct. I mean, it's certainly a very thin margin. We did expect that. The healthcare legislation affects every state differently, and the United States Senate, by design, from the very beginning, is supposed to be much more deliberative and make things harder. So, a win's a win. So if they can get over that threshold and get it, I think that's all that really matters.
Well,
but certainly,
when I heard from the Independent Senator Angus King this morning, he said, "Let me give you a brief synopsis of what we understand of the healthcare bill this afternoon." And he paused. And that was it. So nobody actually understood what they were even voting on. I mean, that's a tragic position, isn't it, for a new president to be in 6 months in?
It's definitely a very interesting political dynamic, but also remember, the United States Senate, when you look at procedures and all these votes on, we're voting to proceed to the vote and all these sort of, we need to actually see the final vote on the text, and I think it's going to be close, but ultimately, this is what makes lawmaking hard. And
Chris, he's calling on the loyalty of the party right now, at the same time that he is trying to fire his own Attorney General, a man whom he appointed just 6 months ago, one of his earliest, most loyal followers, who gave up a good Senate position to be there. How do we understand what is happening in that dynamic and what other Republicans should make of it?
Trying to guess and predict the behavior of President Trump is a very difficult thing to do. I mean,
don't guess it then, and don't predict it, but just tell me how people should behave in terms of their loyalty within the party, within the Republicans.
Well, I think everyone needs to think what their priorities and what they think should happen and their own integrity. But I think this president does have a business negotiation background. He's very high standards and he wants to see things a certain way. I do think that when you put in the Attorney General and he makes that decision, he obviously was being precautious. And if you have nothing to hide, just let those investigations go on and let them fall where they fall. I think it was kind of peculiar, but that's where we're at now, and we'll have to see how it plays out and if he retains the Attorney General. At this moment, it seems like he will.
But there must be, I'm guessing, people like you, Republicans, and critically, people in the Senate and in the House who are asking themselves in all faith, how much longer can we support a president whose actions we might not even understand, let alone support? I mean, if Sessions is fired or is encouraged to go, is that a tipping point now?
I think this is a very interesting case study in American politics and democracy, because this president went to the people, and that's where he's got his mandate, and that's who elected him. I mean, before the election, he was beating up Republicans and Democrats with both hands and then won. And so it really comes down to, will the people continue to support him, and will he continue to have, at least a working relationship to get the agenda through? And I've never seen this kind of political dynamic, 15 years working in politics. It's very unique, and it makes for interesting analysis. At least we can say that.
So when a distinguished professor like Allan Lichtman, who's called the last 9 presidential wins, says that he imagines the impeachment of Donald Trump, not imminently, not September, but down the line. You have to listen to that, presumably, do you?
I think you absolutely need to listen to it, need to look at it. But again, with everyone in the universe looking for something on Russia collusion, we'll find out whether it's collusion delusion or whether it's substantive. And I think that that will come out if there's something there. And if not, the American people deserve action on the items that directly impact their lives. So government's got to work. They've got to get things done legislatively.
Chris Noam, great to talk to you. Thank you.
Good to be with you.
Thanks for coming in. Well, we're joined now by 2 seasoned Trump watchers, James Perchick from the Brookings Institution and Susan Glasser from the news website Politico will join us down the line as well. Very nice to have both of you. Jamie, if I can just start with you. We've heard a lot this week about Russia. We've had Jared Kushner 2 days running in those hearings. We're going to be hearing from Paul Manafort, a former comms director, tomorrow. Allan Lichtman was saying to me earlier that Trump could be the first president that is found guilty of treason.
I think that's a really grave charge to be throwing around. Treason is a very specific definition in the United States. You have to be aiding and abetting an enemy of the United States with whom we're at war. Russia is an adversary. I would say it's an enemy of this country. We're not at war with them. And so I think to rush to that sort of conclusion, to use that sort of language, is really ill-tempered and inaccurate. And I'm not trying to defend Donald Trump and his position on Russia and what his campaign did with Russia. I thought what we saw during the campaign, Trump openly speaking of his admiration for Vladimir Putin, calling on the Russians to hack Hillary Clinton, was abominable behavior. It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. It does not rise to the level of treason. And so I think we have to be very careful about the words that we use.
Susan Gasser, over to you on that one. Do you think that his critics are getting carried away on this one? It could be smoke with no fire.
Well, look, first of all, we are at the beginning stage of multiple different investigations, including most seriously the FBI and special counsel investigation headed by former FBI Director Bob Mueller. But I think Jamie makes a very important point. To throw around words like that is probably not constructive for opponents of President Trump. The impeachment word as well has been used almost since noon on January 20th when Donald Trump became president. And the bottom line is, even if that were to be the outcome, we're talking potentially years of not only investigations, but then a very difficult political process on Capitol Hill before anything of the kind would happen. And you get the sense from talking to lots of people who are understandably confused. They think, well, gee, you know, when is impeachment going to happen? Will it be next month or something?
Democrats are confused as to why Republicans aren't more outraged by any sense of collusion or dealings with Russia, let's say. What do you make of that?
Well, as someone who's been very critical of the Republicans and the stance that they've taken over the past year and a half, really, on Russia, I have to say that they are partly right to be a little skeptical of the outrage being expressed by Democrats. If you look at the record of the Obama administration on Russia over the last 8 years, it started with the reset policy, which began only 6 months after the Russians invaded Georgia. We had just a procession of moves that were basically feckless in dealing with Russia. In 2012, Barack Obama mocked Mitt Romney, the Republican presidential candidate, for saying that Russia was our #1 geopolitical threat. And now a lot of Republicans and conservatives are looking at Democrats, the people who laughed at them 4 years ago for being these sort of retrograde Cold Warriors. They're now lecturing conservatives and Republicans that they're all pawns of Vladimir Putin. So a lot of conservatives are looking at this and they're very skeptical and they think it's cynical.
Susan, would you agree with that? That actually the problems, the ill-ease started with Obama and all the concessions or all the weakness that Putin saw in him?
Well, look, I think you have to go back much farther than that. The bottom line is that it was George W. Bush, a Republican, who first encountered Vladimir Putin as president back in 2001 and said he looked into his soul and he was a man he could do business with. And, you know, there have been a long arc of now actually 4 presidents, because Bill Clinton also had a brief overlap with Vladimir Putin. I've been watching the relationship unfold ever since. And it's fair to say that both Democratic and Republican presidents have come in believing that they could work more closely with Russia, that we had national interests that would converge in key issues around the world. And all of them have found themselves disillusioned at various points. Now, Donald Trump is a huge outlier in that he's the only one of them who has come in fawning over Vladimir Putin's anti-democratic tendencies, fawning over Putin as a leader, and saying basically he admires him as well as that he wants to work with him. Now, inside the United States, in a partisan sense, it's both Democrats and Republicans who have an enormous amount of hypocrisy to go around. Both of them have essentially switched their positions based on nothing to do with Russia, but having to do with the partisan politics of Russia changing here in the United States. So that does make it, I think, very complicated in trying to sort through. But both parties have enough hypocrisy to go around on this issue.
Okay. We're running out of time, so let me just ask you for a big picture now. And to you, Jamie, we are 6 months into the Trump presidency. If somebody said to you, how's it going now? Because I talk to members of the Trump administration who say, ignore the shtick, ignore the tweets, ignore the bombastic side of Trump. He's getting on with the job and it's working. Is that how it seems from inside Washington?
I mean, I think in this bubble of Washington, things can seem a little worse than perhaps they seem out in the country. That said, Donald Trump has not really accomplished any major pieces of legislation that he's been here so far. He's attacking his own attorney general. There are rumors now that his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, might be resigning sometime before the end of the year. So it's not going very good for him. I'm not going to say that it's, impeachment is on the horizon. I think that's being a little hysterical, but it's not going very good for him.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed.